Okay, we are, this is the last leg of the Craig Murray tour of the United States. He's been to Woodstock, he's been to New York City, he's been to Minneapolis, he's been to Baltimore, and now here where this all started. The movement, not the movement, but many events started here 2 years ago, right here, because of the owner insisting, Fritzie Cohen. So this is dedicated to Fritzie Cohen. I want to thank my friends from DC Action for Assange for bringing this strong in today. And you guys have been doing great work. So I'm just going to go from one person to the next today because we're only here as long as the light holds up, okay? We need the natural light. So we started in Woodstock, and it was a wonderful event. And it was with Craig Murray, and the person that brought a lot of people in and galvanized the room, even though I only spoke for 7 minutes. But he's a hero, he's a whistleblower, he's an author, and he's a very wise individual and a dear friend of mine, and that is Scott Ritter. Scott, you get to open up this event, if you would, grace us with your presence.
Well, thank you for coming. You know, the beauty of important messages is that the message lives on forever. It doesn't matter about the moment. In this day and age of social media, what we say here today is going to be captured, and it's going to be broadcast, and people are going to have an opportunity to reflect on what we're going to say and what we stand for. And what we stand for is something that you know, it's actually pretty poignant that we have small numbers here, because what we stand for is the power of the individual, the importance of the individual, as opposed to the importance of the mass, the importance of the crowd. Julian Assange stands for truth. He stands for the power of what one man can do when this person is imbued with a mission to speak truth to power. That's perhaps one of the most important things you can do. And the irony is, he's not an American citizen, but he's behaving in a manner that is more American than 9/10 of the people that walk the streets of this city, the nation's capital, and call themselves Americans. Julian Assange has done that which we should do, which we should aspire to do, to call out the malfeasance of those whom we elect to represent us in higher office. This is an imperative. It's an American imperative. And Julian Assange has set a standard that all Americans should aspire to. And so I, again, thank everybody for coming here tonight. I think this is, you know, it is the issue of our time. Because if we fail here today, if we fail here, not just today, but in general, about Julian Assange, about freedom of speech, about the duties and responsibilities, it's not just the rights of Americans to speak. We have the right to speak. But more importantly, we have a duty to speak if we're going to call ourselves citizens. A duty and responsibility to behave as citizens, calling out to account those who behave in a manner that is incompatible with the ideals, the values, the principles that we all espouse collectively as Americans. So it's great to be here tonight to talk about the importance of someone who's not an American, the importance he has to Americans. Ideas aren't captured by nationalities. It's not captured by definitions. Ideas are ideas. Values are values. Julian Assange has ideas and values that are beyond America. These are values that the world should embrace. So it's good to be here tonight, to bring in Craig Murray, to bring in other people to talk about it. So I'm going to turn the floor over to John. Nope, Randy, I'm not turning the floor over to anybody. Who am I turning it over to?
Well, you can turn over to John Kiriakou because he's got those lungs. He can He can speak for 45 minutes. He can do a filibuster. He can do a strong Thurman type filibuster. I think Jeff will qualify to be on the Supreme Court as we are waiting for Craig and Max to ascend.
And I can stretch this out for as long as you want, Randy.
Why don't you do another 2 or 3 minutes?
I can go
and
another
talk
2 or 3
about
minutes.
how important it is for whistleblowers like Craig Murray.
Well, here's the thing about whistleblowers. Randy, I appreciate you putting me into that fine crowd. I am not a whistleblower. Because in order to qualify as a whistleblower, you need to go through a process of engagement with authorities to get the authorities to do the right thing. And if the authorities fail to do the right thing, then the burden falls on the whistleblower to speak out in a process that's not authorized. This is why you need whistleblower protections. Because when they make that decision, that courageous decision to put themselves out there, they will be held to account, they will be pursued, etc. I didn't have to go through the processes because I was a United Nations whistleblower, and the United Nations had no authority over me whatsoever. I was under no threat from the United Nations. The United States government wasn't happy with what I said, but that's a different story. That has nothing to do with whistleblowing and everything to do with retribution, which is part of whistleblowing, unfortunately. But it is imperative that we have protections for whistleblowers so that they can go through the right processes, get the information out, and then that we ensure that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, does right by the people in ensuring that those who speak out about government malfeasance are protected. You know, if we had adequate whistleblower protections, we wouldn't have a need for Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. What is Julian Assange guilty of? Exposing the truth, exposing the crimes of government. That's not a crime. Whistleblowers are supposed to be doing the same thing. They have seen malfeasance, they have seen the crimes, they are trying to bring it to the attention of those who can correct the wrongdoing. And if that isn't done, then they can speak out. They should be protected. Julian Assange and WikiLeaks exists because America, frankly speaking, sucks at protecting the American people's constitutional rights. Remember, this isn't theoretical. The Supreme Court has said straight up that it is the duty of Americans to call out the lies of government. It's the responsibility. Americans are protected to do that. Julian Assange did the job because we didn't have the mechanisms in place to make sure the job could be done for us. So, again, we owe Julian Assange a huge debt of gratitude. And now I'm going to turn the floor over to John Kiriakou, who's going to continue.
Hey, buddy. Hello. So I have never been to business school, but I'm told that the first thing you learn in business school is that hope is not a strategy. Many of us have hoped for a long time that Julian Assange would never be extradited to the United States. And I suppose there's still some hope. But at the same time, what we should be doing is hoping for the best and preparing for the worst. And I think that that's what we've been doing the last couple of years. So it looks like things are coming to crunch time. And one of the great things that we all have going right now, one of the great things that Julian Assange has going right now, is that there are people who are going to cover his story in a truthful and honest manner in the event that he arrives here at the Eastern District of Virginia. I'm glad for Julian that there is a person like Max Blumenthal who's going to cover that story. Max Blumenthal is, of course, the founder and editor of The Gray Zone, which we all read. But he's also someone that I have great admiration for. I have great admiration for anybody who stands up to the cops when they bust down the door of your house with no reason and no probable cause and try to take you to jail because they don't like your politics. That's what Julian underwent. Many of us have undergone similar treatment. It's one thing to say, but officer, I didn't do anything wrong. Sir, why are you doing this, sir? I don't know why people call him sir, number one. It drives me crazy when I watch cops and everybody's like so meek and humble and calling him sir. You have to stand up for yourself and stand up for your rights the way Julian Assange stood up for us. That's what Max Blumenthal did. So if we're going to have somebody in that courtroom to tell us the truth of what's happening every day, it makes me happy and confident that it's going to be the likes of Max Blumenthal and Anya Parampil and Kevin Gustala and people who we know are going to tell us the truth. So I can't wait to hear what Max Blumenthal has to say, not just about this case and about Julian, but about the way forward, because that's really the important part here. So Max Blumenthal.
So you're going to speak later?
No.
You're just here to introduce me?
Yeah. It was my pleasure. Believe me.
Okay. I wanted to hear from you. You know more about this than I do. John, I mean, I've learned so much from John. I listen to you every day.
Oh, thank you.
105.5 FM.
Me too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Uh,
So you're the guys.
I'm the guy. You're looking great, by the way.
Thank you. Appreciate that too.
And we've been honored to host former Ambassador Craig Murray at our place. Learned so much in the past few days about the regime that we're up against because of Craig's own experience being jailed for his journalism, for jigsaw identification, saying someone in a courtroom had curly hair. He was jailed as they were trying to put Alex Salmond on trial because he was a political enemy of the regime, Scottish independence leader. He was jailed because he was a gadfly. He was getting in the way of the regime. Like Kit Clarenberg was interrogated and detained, our contributor, because he exposed one of the most prominent journalists in the UK, Paul Mason, as a security state collaborator. Because he exposed British plans to escalate the war in Ukraine that they were sponsoring by bombing the Kerch Bridge, by organizing Ukrainian terror teams to attack inside Crimea. We've seen Elon Musk resist a plan to do a Pearl Harbor in Crimea, which wasn't his job at all with Starlink, and he's under full attack from the regime for that. And so that, I mean, I think that's what we're here today to try to clarify, and I think that's what Julian Assange shows to us. He was really one of the canaries in the coal mine. I mean, whose Twitter account was banned before Scott Ritter's Twitter account was banned, before Donald Trump's Twitter account was removed? I think Julian Assange was one of the first major Twitter accounts to just be completely cut off. And his final message was that we can resolve pandemics, diplomatic disputes, political polarization through discussion, through open debate and conversation. He was speaking against the kind of censorship that we're facing here in the West, not in Russia or China, through a regime that operates behind the cover of liberal democracy. Liberal democracy at this point in this country is a marketing scheme. It's a marketing scheme that is deployed to convince the majority of the public that they have free will, when if they get in the way of that cold hard regime that has no public has no public mandate, was not elected, is faceless, operates behind the cover of private Silicon Valley corporations, intelligence groups, private spying operations like Palantir, that if they do that, they will be cut off like Julian Assange. And they still believe that. That's why every 4 years, everyone is forced to endure endless propaganda about voting. Vote, vote, vote. Everyone's wearing masks in 2020 that say vote. Google, vote, 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 vote. We have free choice. Julian Assange shows us what the stakes are, and that as long as he is jailed and that this regime of control is not broken, we don't. Liberal democracy is just a marketing ploy. Our fundraising campaign at GoFundMe was frozen due to external concerns. Mint Press News was cut off completely from TikTok. GoFundMe completely cut them off. Consortium News cut off from PayPal. Our managing editor, Wyatt Reed, cut off from Venmo, cut off from PayPal. All for their political views. They're never given an explanation. No one explains why. We know who's doing this. we know through the Twitter files, which we were fortunate enough to have, which is one of the most significant things, which probably would have been on WikiLeaks at another point in history where WikiLeaks wasn't being held hostage right now. They can't challenge the regime because they need to do everything they can to convince it to release Julian, their founder. We know from the Twitter leaks that the Ukrainian SBU security services instructed the FBI to ban my colleague Aaron Mate from Twitter, along with an entire list of Twitter users, and that the FBI went to Twitter and told them to do it on behalf of a foreign country. And that was even too much for the pre-Elon regime. I mean, even before Elon, they said, this is too much. These are just Americans and Canadians stating their opinion. But that's what the regime wanted. And when I say regime, I don't mean just Washington. It's a transatlantic regime that includes the Five Eyes. Obviously, the U.S. is leading the regime. And I don't mean America. The American people don't support it. And we can see with Donald Trump's approval rating going up with each indictment that fewer and fewer Americans support the regime. They are supporting Donald Trump for one reason and one reason only, and it's not because of any political policy program that Donald Trump is putting forward. It's to give the finger to the establishment. That's what they want to do. That's why he was elected in 2016. And so there's a big opportunity there, actually, for this movement. If we actually want to fill up rooms, this movement has traditionally functioned exclusively on the political left, which is more fragmented, more neutered, and more protective of the political establishment than at any time in my life. And this movement should be having tables at Turning Point USA conferences, at CPAC conferences. Me and Anya worked directly with Tucker Carlson to get him to feature segments supporting Julian Assange when we realized that he supported him. And we helped arrange the Roger Waters, getting Roger on there. And Roger had to think about it. Do I want to go on this show? I don't agree with him on immigration and all these other things where he has some views that we consider retrograde. Well, Donald Trump was president. Donald Trump watches Tucker every night. Why would we not do that? Who's going to be president next? Is it going to be a Democrat? Do we have to put everything on the squad? Who won't even, it took them forever to do any letter for Assange. No, we should be operating in a bipartisan fashion. Speaking to anyone who listened, and as I found, I spoke at the Defeat the Mandates rally in Los Angeles because I opposed the COVIDian aspect, the biomedical security aspect of the regime, which was rearing its head for the first time under cover of a pandemic. And Sam Husseini's been doing some important work on the origins of that pandemic, as we saw recently with his exchange at the State Department, where they refused to answer his question about USAID sponsoring gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And when I mentioned at that rally for a mostly conservative crowd, 20,000 people in the middle of Los Angeles, in downtown Los Angeles, the minute I mentioned Julian Assange, the entire crowd roared with approval and support for Julian Assange. So we need to be reaching out to them and mobilizing them. When we can't seem to mobilize, the left, center left, whatever's left of the left. Is anything left of the left?
No.
We still need to try. We need to also get in the faces of journalists and organizations that claim to support press freedom but refuse to speak out for Julian Assange. It shouldn't be left up to the LaRouche organization and the Schiller Institute to get in their faces. But hey, let's be real. They're doing a good job. They're doing it. Why isn't every time there's some talk on press freedom and they bring out some National Endowment for Democracy, U.S. intelligence asset like Maria Ressa, who said that Julian Assange is not a real journalist? Why aren't they being confronted? That's a way of raising awareness. So I think that is a priority as well. And I think it's important that people are now meeting here to talk about possible extradition, but we can't allow that to enter the discussion as an inevitability, because that would be a terrible result to have him come over here, as John can attest to, in Northern Virginia, in that court, with a jury. of the spooks, for the spooks, and the contractors, and the Beltway bandits. That, I mean, it would be a very tough hill to climb. I've been in that courtroom before for some of the terror trials. I've seen Gordon Kromberg, the prosecutor, operate. He is a fanatical ideologue who's determined to destroy anyone who opposes, who presents a real political challenge to the establishment. He took on all the major Muslims and civil society leaders on behalf of his neoconservative buddies like Stephen Emerson on a purely political basis and ruined their lives, ruined their families' lives, and he's determined to do it to Julian Assange. So we cannot allow that. We can't discuss that as an inevitability, even though we need to be prepared for it. And finally, we cannot allow any independent candidate or supposed anti-establishment candidate to proceed on the campaign trail without putting themselves at the forefront of this movement, using their campaign as a platform for this movement, because there's no point in running for president unless you're going to do that. That's the only point in running for president. Otherwise, you're just validating the regime and the liberal democracy it uses as veneer, as a patina for the system of inverted totalitarianism, what Sheldon Wolin, the late political scientist, called inverted totalitarianism. Julian Assange is the canary in the coal mine. He's also someone we should see as an individual, not as a figure, towers above everyone, but as an individual who had some extremely brilliant insights and has been silenced partly because he, as an individual, was so forward-thinking and innovative. And we also need to continue to review the record that WikiLeaks gave us. I don't know how much time I have, but we're doing an 2 minutes?
Yeah.
So just like, yeah, we have to continue to review the record and honor the record. Cablegate remains so important to us at the gray zone. I don't think we'd be the gray zone without it, without the State Department diplomatic cables. One piece we're working on now is about Honduras. The former leader, president of Honduras, is going on trial, is being extradited. His brother's been sentenced to life, Tony Hernandez. His name is Juan Orlando Hernandez. And in this federal district court, the filings by the prosecutor show that the United States knew that Honduras was a gigantic, its government was running one of the largest narco-trafficking operations in human history while they were supporting that government. And we know how they were supporting that government and fixing elections through Cablegate. Thomas Shannon, the US ambassador, was talking and was emailing the Obama administration saying, we organized one of the greatest shows of democracy in 2009 when protesters against the coup were being beaten in the streets, voting machines were being shut down, people were being gunned down for protesting at the airport in Honduras, where the real president, Manuel Zelaya, was being thrown out. So the veneer of what the US was trying to do there is the backdrop for our entire immigration crisis, with all these caravans coming out of this destabilized country, which is fueling the right wing in this country. We can understand that through Cablegate. So we already have so much to work with there. And what we're trying to do at the Gray Zone is to continue that legacy by being a repository for reporting on intelligence intrigues, classified documents, and doing justice to the legacy. But if they bring him here, if they bring Julian to the spookified court in Northern Virginia, we'll have to focus directly on that trial, and I hope that there'll be more people than there are in this room will be outside there every day, making it an extremely uncomfortable experience for the regime. So thank you for your time, and thanks to John. As I said, we've been honored to host Craig Murray here. He's come a long way, and he's come a long way with Randy. So that's a really special distinction. You should get a Purple Heart for that. Greg.
And a
was-
silver medal.
Greg is a whistleblower. He blew the whistle on torture in Uzbekistan. He is constantly exposing intelligence intrigues like the Skripal affair. I just interviewed him up in Dave's office, and it blew my mind what I didn't know about the Skripal affair, as well as the persecution of Julian Assange. He's been at the forefront, and it's why he himself has been persecuted by the transatlantic intelligence regime. And so I can't think of anyone who could teach us more about what we can do to get in the way and hopefully get Julian Assange back to his family. So, Craig Murray.
Thank you, Matt. I had some time today, so I went wandering around Washington doing bits and pieces. I joined some lovely people in a vigil outside the Department of Justice, and I was thinking of the irony of calling it the Department of Justice, given what's happened. The Department of Injustice, maybe a positive name. You know, they are pursuing a case against Julian Assange, where they, the CIA, have admittedly, they don't deny it, where the CIA has tapes of his defense council meetings. They have videoed in the embassy his meetings with his defense counsel. And isn't that extraordinary?
Yes.
I can't think of any other case where if the government was videoing the defendant's meetings with the defense counsel, the case wouldn't be thrown out. In any functioning democracy in the world, that would in itself stop the case. That to me is just incredible. Added to that, when he was dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy, and that was theatre. They didn't allow him for that last year in the Ecuadorian embassy, after the change of regime in Ecuador. He was a prisoner in the Ecuadorian embassy. And the last couple of months, he wasn't allowed to the bathroom to look after himself. He wasn't allowed to shave. He was kept in very bad conditions. And that was deliberate. That's why he looked like Howard Hughes with the wild beard and matted hair. And that was theatre. They did that on purpose. I, in fact, myself, phoned because we knew, because we had people in the Ecuadorian government left over from the Korea government who were decent, and they told us this was happening and he was about to be taken out from the embassy. So a few days before, maybe a week before, I phoned the first secretary of the Ecuadorian embassy, and I said to him, we're grateful to the people of Ecuador for looking after Julian all these years. We understand you may now have decided you wish him to leave. Let's do this in a civilized way. Let's allow him to tidy up, put on a suit, and we'll agree a time, and he'll walk out the door and hand himself over to the police, if that's what you wish. And they said, no, of course not. No, we would never do such a thing. Because the whole thing was arranged as theatre, as part of the dehumanization of Julian, as part of his attempt to portray him as some way not sympathetic or human. And there's so much more to that. The fact that no one has been allowed to see his wedding photos. Nobody has seen his wedding photos. The wedding photographer was not allowed into the jail when he married Stella. A prison guard took a couple of photos on a cell phone, and they were only given to Stella on the strict condition that she showed them to nobody else. And of course, they have Julian, so they can do anything to Julian. So those kind of things are binding. I visited Julian a couple of times in the jail in the last few weeks. That was the first time they allowed me to visit him since he's been there. And I was very proud of this, because Belmarsh is the UK's highest security jail, where the most dangerous terrorists are kept. It's our highest security prison. And I was never allowed to visit him because I am a danger to the prison. And this is a prison where you are, when you go in to visit him, you go through 4 different airlocks, and you are fingerprinted 4 times in each airlock. You are searched, you are obviously go through scanners, and you are sniffed by large dogs every time you go through. And this also happens to Julian's children when they visit him. The dogs are substantially bigger than Julian's children, and it makes them terrified to go in and see their father. But the idea that I, who you may not have you may have noticed, I'm not Superman. I'm not a physically intimidating figure. The idea I am a danger to this prison full of armed guards, I thought was, well, I'm proud of that actually. That's rather wonderful. They finally relented and allowed me to go visit him on condition I do not tell anybody about the visit. And again, if I break that condition, of course, they may stop anyone else visiting. They may do goodness knows what to him. So they have this ability to enforce even further restrictions of freedom of speech of that kind. But as I say, they had video of him with his defense counsel. They seized his defense papers when he left the embassy. The papers were taken by the Ecuadorian government from the embassy. They were sent to Quito. And again, this is admitted. This is not in dispute. In Quito, all his defense papers were handed over to the FBI. The official story, the CIA did not dispute in the extradition hearings in London that they had video of Julian's meetings with his defense counsel. But this is what they said. This was the official US government line given in court. They said the CIA had videoed, through UC Global, had videoed his meetings with defense counsel, but it was okay because they did not show the video to anybody. Now, were I an American taxpayer, I would wonder why the CIA is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars collecting videos they don't show to anybody. You know what? That is so self-evidently nonsense, so self-evidently untrue. But that is the kind of obvious fiction that this charade, this legal theatre, is proceeding along. I just went from the Department of Justice. I thought I would go to the courtroom in Alexandria where he would be tried, just to see what that is like. So I found the federal court, and I went to enter, as any member of the public is entitled to do. They asked me for my ID, as they ask everyone, I believe, and I handed them my passport. And they made a phone call, and somebody came down, and he had a badge on which said US Marshal's Office. And he said, well, sorry, sir, you can't enter the courtroom. And I said, is it not a public courtroom? Is there not a public right of access? And he said, yes, sir, but you are not the public. And I said, but they're trials. Trials, you know, by law are open to the public, generally. He said, yes, sir, I'm sorry, you can't come in, Ambassador Murray. He said, and that was really interesting, because nowhere in my passport does it give my title, nor had I mentioned it. So how did they know who I am, if you see what I mean? The level of surveillance, I don't know if that's facial recognition technology, I don't know what it is that's brought that up. I don't know whether they had a memo sitting on their desk in the courtroom saying if Craig Murray ever comes, don't let him in. And what does that mean for the open access should Julian have a trial here? And how is it that you can have a system where, I'm not sure if you've ever been to Alexandria. I'm not sure, has anyone ever seen the film The Stepford Wives? It's extraordinary. You could eat your dinner off the sidewalk. It is the most... I asked the taxi driver how much does a house cost, and he said, I've no idea, but a small apartment will cost you about $1.2 million. And there are more American flags there than at a ticket day parade. It is just astonishing. But absolutely astonishing that they can cherry pick. They can cherry pick the jurisdiction with the most national security oriented population in order to hold trials there. I mean, Julian's never been near the place. No. Why the United States has jurisdiction in the first place over an act that did not take place in America. And Julian has no loyalty to the United States. He's an Australian citizen. So, of course, there's a fundamental question of why are you claiming jurisdiction over something a foreign person does, not in the United States? And what will you say in a couple of years' time when China picks up an American journalist who happens to be in London or somewhere and charges him with publishing facts about China they didn't want revealed? You know, why do you think, why does the United States think it can do this and other countries can't do it to the United States? Especially when you would have to be extremely stupid to notice that, not to notice that the United States is on the cusp of slipping away from its hegemonic position. These are extraordinary things, but even if you accept that question of universal jurisdiction, why then do you accept, why is the United States allowed to cherry pick a particular district where they know they have the most chance of success? How can that enter the jurisprudence? How can anybody logically defend that? But there is no logic here. And this is supposed to be the greatest democracy in the world, ho ho. And no, it's like the emperor's new clothes. No, it plainly is not a democracy. It plainly is entirely dysfunctional. How can you have a functional democracy when the two people who apparently are the fit candidates to be the greatest people in the country and the most fit people to run the country are Joe Biden and Donald Trump, who on any logical analysis are probably the two least fit people to run the country? Well, they've certainly been a bottom one. Plainly, the democratic system is not functioning at all. And we have this extraordinary situation where throughout Western so-called democracy, there's no choice. A democracy is a system where you have a realistic choice between different courses of policy. What are the real policy differences? I mean, in foreign policy, there's perhaps a slight difference between in which month you bomb another country. But that's about as far as foreign policy difference extends. And in domestic policy, there's very, you have a choice between do you vote for the blue conservative or the red conservative. That's what choice, so-called, amounts to. And I agree entirely with what Max was saying, but I think there almost is no distinction between left and right in politics that counts, because in mainstream politics in the United States, there is no left. No, there are no left-wing policies on offer to anybody. And in a sense, the distinction which carries most traction now is between libertarians and authoritarians. And you can be libertarian and left, and you can be libertarian and right. But the very belief in freedom of speech, the very belief in the First Amendment is under fundamental attack. And it's mostly under attack by people who view themselves as being in the political centre. It's extraordinary. We need to create a movement that uses Julian's case and uses the fight for Julian. A movement which uses that fight in order to reassert the fundamental value of freedom of expression. And remember, one of the arguments, the legal arguments they have deployed in court in London, they would deploy in court should Julian come here, is that as a foreign citizen, Julian has no First Amendment rights. And again, what an extraordinary argument. He's a foreign citizen, he wasn't in the United States, but they still claim jurisdiction over him, but they claim he has the obligations to follow US law, even though he's not in the US, but has none of the rights granted by US law because he is outside the US. That's not a respectable argument. But remember, freedom of speech is not only the freedom for me to give my opinion, it's the freedom for you to hear my opinion and evaluate it. And in attacking freedom of speech, you're not just attacking the ability of people to put out information, you're attacking the ability of the American people to learn information and decide for themselves what is true and what is false and what course they wish to follow. So this is a vital fight. There's never been any dispute that the information which WikiLeaks put out was true information. They're very, very keen nowadays of trying to ban information from reaching the public which they don't like by calling it misinformation or disinformation, which is a term which simply means information the government does not wish you to know. And the biggest single progenitor of misinformation and disinformation is the government. They are the least people. They're the last people whose pronouncements I trust. And they're the last people to be allowed to tell you what is true and what is false. WikiLeaks gave you direct access to the original source material, so you can choose what you want to believe and what you want to make of that material. That was a tremendous breakthrough. WikiLeaks and Julian Assange has been a huge enabler of genuine citizen-led democracy, and that is why we have to continue to fight for his freedom. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Craig Murray. All right, I want to thank everybody. He's got to leave. Ford Fischer, who's live streaming this on YouTube and on Twitter and on Facebook, has a, I think, what, car wreck on Massachusetts you have to get to?
Another news story.
Oh, another one. All right.
So I will leave you all off the record.
I know the news story is that Ukrainian armed forces are marching in on.
It's not actually that.
They're moving forward. All right, so Craig, that was wonderful. Thank you very much. I want to thank Scott Ritter, my dear friend, and Max Blumenthal. We're going to take questions informally once he turns off the live stream. And thank you, folks, for tuning in. You can go now, Ford Fischer. All right.